And welcome into another weekly RedRecover.com Inside the Paint Show. He's Kurt Helin from NBCSports.com and Pro Basketball Talk. And I'm Ira Winderman from the Sun Sentinel, but you probably already know that. Kurt, we're at a point where it's actually for real. It actually means something. And obviously you saw yesterday with the Lakers and they started their season and where they stand with that. So let's sort of look at where we are right now with the NBA, with the Miami Heat, real quick at the top of our show. First of all, last night, we got a couple of season opening games. Interesting at the start. The Celtics look very Celtics. Yeah. And the Lakers look very Lakers. Of course, the Warriors also look very Warriors. So give me a quick takeaway. Only 2 games on the schedule last night, national television only. Kurt, the start of the NBA season. Any surprises? What did it mean to you?
I don't think there were huge surprises, were there? Ira? Look, the second game we can sum up really quickly. The Lakers can't shoot. The Warriors can shoot.
Yes.
That's your ball game. That's pretty much sums it up. Beyond their what do you do with Russell Westbrook issues, it really just that team can't shoot. They were bad in the preseason. They've been bad now. I think you summed up the first game pretty well. The Celtics looked like they picked up where they left off, didn't they? Like they just, hey, we're back. We're going to run. Their transition was good. Brogdon gave them 15 points and quality minutes off the bench. The Jays each had 35. Like they're flowing. The one takeaway I would say that was a little different, a little that I didn't expect, and we'll see. It's a long season, but Philadelphia's bench was terrible. Like their improved bench was 3 for 14 for 11 points as a bench. Like it was not improved. It was terrible. And defensively, like we know James Harden's bad, but Harden and Maxey were just getting torched, and the spacing that they can use in Boston with Al Horford, with their centers, like it really gave Philadelphia problems. There wasn't anybody at the rim. Guys were just getting torched. Philadelphia, for a team I really liked on paper, didn't impress me. Now it's one game against the Celtics at the start of the season, so like I'm going to go down that road really far, but like I thought Maxey was a better defender than that, and he looked like a traffic cone out there half the night.
Yeah, it's obviously early, and I don't want to rush to judgments early. We will get to the Heat opener, by the way, tonight, Chicago Bulls, 7:30, FTX Arena. Wanted to get a quick look at last night. One thing that struck me last night, Kurt, was one thing about last season's start of the season. Remember when everyone said the 2 Jays couldn't play together, and it's an either-or with Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, and how far we've come. So because of that, there was a solid month last year, Kurt, when the Celtics got off to their horrible start, when everyone said, you've got to break up the 2 Jays. This isn't working. So people, small sample size theater, please keep your perspective, whether it's the Celtics and the Sixers last night, whether it's the Lakers and the Warriors, or whether it's the Heat and the Bulls tonight. Again, 82-game marathon we have to pull back. Game 2 last night, Warriors are just great. They were great. They will be great. The way they've set up their salaries, they are going to be great. What I found really interesting about the Lakers box score is this. There were only 2 players on the Lakers to make more than 1 3-pointer. One was a former Heat player you might have heard of, LeBron James. Another was a former Heat player we're finally hearing from again in Kendrick Nunn. Kurt, your thoughts on Kendrick Nunn, because it's a local story down here, what he can do for the Lakers, and based on what I saw last night, they need a few more Kendrick Nunns, don't they?
Oh, they do. They've been one of the things that the Lakers internally have really counted on for improvement this year was just getting Kendrick Nunn back. He did not play last year due to injury. He can shoot the 3. He's a solid defender. He makes smart decisions. He gives them a little extra shot creation. I mean, he just kind of he checks a lot of boxes that the Lakers clearly desperately need. But the shooting is they're going to ask a lot of him. I mean, LeBron James was their best 3-point shooter last season, it's not good. Like I like nothing against LeBron, but if LeBron's your best 3-point shooter, you're in trouble. And it kind of was that way again last night. Nunn brings them. I mean, they're just leaning hard into him. Let me just say, every time you talk to them, whether it's Darvin Ham or people behind the scenes, they're banking on him being the guy they paid for to help turn this thing around. And I thought, look, he was solid in the preseason. I thought he was solid last night. I think, this is he's not going to step up. He's not, you were talking about Oladipo. Kendrick Nunn's not going to be an all-star, but for what they're paying him, he can be a quality rotation player every night. And right now, those might be in short supply out west. Well, at least in that team. Like the other team in LA's got like rotation guys to spare.
Right, in droves. And the reason I want to use that to sort of as a comparative, and by the way, the chat board is blowing up. I will get to that. Please smash the like buttons as you go along here on our redrecover.com Inside the Pain show. The commonality I saw last night was the Lakers don't have a bench. I mean, oh my God, it's awful.
Yes.
Like you said, the Sixers, we thought have a bench. And again, DeAnthony Melton, and Daniel House, they'll come around. They'll provide something. But the transition here is what we were talking about with Big O in our crosstalk with the Big O show was if you take the Heat bench and you take away Victor Oladipo. So now all of a sudden you have the likes of Dwayne Dedman and a Haywood Highsmith and Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and Duncan Robinson. It doesn't overwhelm you. And I think what the Lakers are showing also is the bench matters in the NBA because LeBron James was certainly good last night. Anthony Davis was very good. And I know the bar has changed, Kurt Helin, but Russell Westbrook wasn't terrible. Like it's almost like a different Russell Westbrook bar you have these days. So when you look at the Miami Heat and you were saying, okay, hey, pretty interesting starting lineup. You have Adebayo, you have Caleb Martin, you have Jimmy Butler, you have Tyler Hero, you have Kyle Lowry, pretty good stuff there. And then you look at the bench and I just mentioned, how concerning or how concerned are you of a Miami Heat team that does not have the skills, at least for tonight, maybe short term, perhaps longer, of Victor Oladipo? In other words, Kurt, when you were doing your East rankings for NBCSports.com and Pro Basketball Talk, if I would have told you, strip off Victor Oladipo from the roster, how much would that have impacted your thinking or not on the Miami Heat?
Not that dramatically in the regular season, just because they're the Heat, man. Like you said, talking to Orlando at the start of Inside the Paint, the redrecover.com show, like now we're going to lean into Gabe Vincent more. Well, Gabe played well last year. Like
very well.
There's a ceiling to it, right? Like right. There's a ceiling to how high he's going to go. And again, shout out UCSB where my daughter goes. But like Gabe Vincent's going to be solid. But I feel that way about Duncan Robinson and all these other guys you mentioned coming off the bench. Like the Miami they've built a culture. They've got a team with Eric Spoelstra where I trust they are going to get the most out of that bench. That they are not going to, if Oladipo's absence is extended, you start to think about other options. But right now, we'll see where he is. I don't doubt that they're going to be able to get enough production out of that bench for the regular season against teams like the Bulls. Like, it's going to show up against the Celtics because the Celtics are bringing Grant Williams and Malcolm Brogdon and quality guys off the bench, and it's going to be harder. But against the Bulls, you should be okay. Like, you should be able to rack up enough wins until you get him back to see what he's going to be. And if he's not going to be that guy, then do you start thinking about other options? Do you start thinking longer term if Oladipo's not able to be the guy you need him to be?
Yeah, I mean, then, and I agree. There's one thing I will say about this, and we're all somewhat guilty of this. We talk in the NBA in terms of first team and second team as if it's NFL offense and defense and as if they don't mesh at all.
Yeah.
Every team staggers its rotation. Tonight, early, within, I'd say, the first 4 minutes, either Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, or Kyle Lowry will come off the floor, not because of foul trouble, because they can then rotate them in with the reserves. So when I say there's no shot creator in the second unit because Oladipo's not available, that doesn't mean that Tyler Hero won't be in with those players, or Jimmy Butler be in with those players, or Kyle Lowry be in with those players. So you will always have someone out there, just like the Lakers desperately know they could never play with LeBron or Anthony Davis if both are available off the court at the same time, because then they become the Rockets and the Thunder and the Kings and a team at the bottom, if that, of the playoff hunt in the Western Conference. But still, I'm sort of curious from the outside view, the long view, the national perspective like Kurt Helin does at NBCSports.com. When you heard Victor Oladipo was going to be out for the opener and is missing time with left knee tendinosis, was it a thunderbolt or was it, Victor's always hurt?
He's missed so much time, and like he looked good in the playoffs last year. I mean, we've seen stuff from him, but it was not a thunderbolt because it wasn't wildly out of left field, right? Like he's missed a lot of time the last few years. I assumed he was going to miss some time this year. It's going to be at the start of the season, but I mean, did it catch the Heat off guard? Did they expect a healthier, like internally, was this, like you said, there doesn't seem to be a great plan B. Did this catch them off guard?
I think they knew from the get-go that Vic was not 100% right. I think they gave the contract in the offseason based on faith. If you remember, Victor Oladipo originally was going to get a 1-year, $11 million deal and then go off into the ether and free agency. Then the Heat needed to come up with some money under the luxury tax to do the rest of their contracts. So they switched it to a 2-year 18. Average amount comes down per year. Victor gets the extra year. Once Victor agreed to that, to get the insurance season, I said to myself, something's a little off here. For the unbelievable guy who has unbelievable confidence, for him to protect himself. Remember, Victor, as you know, Kurt, Victor gave up, I think it was about a $100 million contract with Indiana. He gave up an extension with the Rockets in the $60, $70 million range. He's not going to come close to coming back to getting that money. And once Victor Oladipo started insuring his future, that's when I said to myself, there might be something at play here. He knows. They see him in practice. They have his medicals. They see him in the training room. They know what's going on. You're always optimistic. You've seen players who've come back, pushed through the worst of times, and you've seen players who haven't. My example is Tim Hardaway. Tim Hardaway at the end in the Zoe years, he pushed through until you realized there was no cartilage there. It was bone on bone in the knee, and he was done, and they moved him off to Dallas, and they ended that era a little bit prematurely. Vic sure seems to be trending that way. I'd say more than anything, was it shocking, Kurt? No. Was it disappointing? Very much so. So I want to take you tonight, opening night, Chicago Bulls, FTX Arena, 7:30 p.m. down here in South Florida. It'll be on Bally Sports Sun. The Chicago Bulls, to me, are one of those absolutely teetering teams. They were great at the start of last season. They were they led the Eastern Conference standings, I think, for 2 solid months. And everyone's like, oh, my God, DeMar DeRozan is back at 32. Billy Donovan got out of Oklahoma City. He finally has a winning team. And then they came down a little bit. Are the Chicago Bulls good, any good, a competitor, a contender this year, Kurt Helin?
They're good, but they're one of – there's a whole flight of teams in the East that are good and probably headed to the play-in. The Washington Wizards with Beal and Kristaps Porzingis, and it might be the Hawks. Because I'm a little less sold on the Trae Young, DeJounte Murray melding, but like there's a lot of teams in the good range. I kind of think the Bulls are in there. This isn't a bad team by any stretch. Like they're going to be probably a little above 500 or in that ballpark, but are you going to get the same? I mean, DeMar DeRozan had the best season of his career. He has become a better playmaker, but Ira, do you really expect him to have that same kind of season? And no Lonzo Ball to start the season. That hurts their defense. That hurts their transition game. They have other players who kind of individually can fill in part of the gap, but they don't have one guy they can put out there who does everything for them. Lonzo does. So not having Lonzo Ball, I don't love their depth. I just don't think that they're going to be able, I don't think they're going to be as bad as they were at points last season, but I don't think they're leading the East again this year. I think it's a beatable team for what is, like we've talked about before, just a deeper East at the top, right? With if you're counting the Nets, 5 really good teams.
Yeah, I spoke to someone around the Heat, and they said they wouldn't be surprised if Chicago joins the tankathon. That if they realize it's not going the right way, with DeMar DeRozan a tradable contract at 33, that they could head the other way. To Lonzo take the season off, take additional time off, move off DeMar DeRozan, get in there, the ultimate lottery this year, whether it's for Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson or someone like that. So I think Chicago is the kind of team that's really pins and needles at the start of the season. Get off to a good start. We know Billy Donovan wants to play to win. He's been through all of that in Oklahoma City. But at some point, I think it could turn. But when I look at this Bulls lineup right now, and they're going to go with Patrick Williams as their starting power forward, they're going to try to make it work there. And again, you can look at it and say, is Zach LaVine a great player? And that's something I wanted to sort of throw at you also, because it's interesting. We talk about the Bulls. We talk about what DeMar DeRozan added coming over from San Antonio, free agency. People thought too large of a contract. We saw what happened when they added Nikola Vucevic and gave up those first-round picks to the Orlando Magic to get more of a quality center and input. But the one constant there was Zach LaVine, who has shown he can be great at moments. Is Zach LaVine a great NBA player? Is Zach LaVine an all-NBA talent level player? Is Zach LaVine a perennial NBA All-Star? Because that's Chicago's best player. And is that, I'm going to phrase it another way, Kurt Helin. If Zach LaVine is your best player, how good of a team are you?
Playoff team. Like he is a very good offensive player, right? Like he has developed, and to his credit, by the way, put in the work, because when he came in the league, he was all athleticism, right? He was jumping out of the building, he's winning dunk contests, but the craft to his game is something he worked on and got. So credit to the man. But I think, to use your analogies you were saying before, he's an all-star. He's going to be a pretty regular all-star. He can put up points, but I don't think he's an all-NBA player. He's not the two-way top 15 guy. He's certainly not the top 10 kind of guy you ultimately need if you want. If you don't have a Jimmy Butler, it's really hard to crack the contender status group, right? Like you need a guy who can be that guy in the playoffs like Jimmy can be. I just don't. Zach's not that guy, is he? He's just not.
And they traded Jimmy Butler.
He's a nice player.
And they traded Jimmy Butler for him in that trade with Minnesota. So you go back to the previous management, the previous coaching staff, and what they did. Look, folks, the chat board is blowing up. Matter of fact, I can't even scroll back up. I've got so many. We'll get to that at the start of our next segment. I also want to look a little further into a Heat season preview, take it out just beyond tonight's season opener. So we will get to where the Heat start tonight, but also where the Heat are headed. We'll get to all of your, or some of yours, I'm going to be honest, questions here on the chat board, and we'll do that after this short break on redrecover.com, Inside the Paint. Ira Winderman, South Florida Sun Sentinel over here. Kurt Helin, NBCSports.com, pro basketball talk. Man who knows everything about the NBA over there. And we're back on the Inside the Paint, redrecover.com show. Again, tonight, Heat season opener, Chicago Bulls, FTX Arena, 7:30 p.m., but we all know that means 7:40 p.m. Bally Sports Sun down here on your league pass somewhere. Although I really wonder, the national folks, when you look at the whole slate of games today, if they say, Heat Bulls, that's where I'm going to be at 7:30, but another story for another moment. Kurt, I'm going to try to get to the chat board here real quick, so sort of rapid responses. First of all, thanks everyone for chiming in here. Feel free to add your comments, but you must also smash those like buttons or Big O gets very angry. So we'll go from there. Kevin G says, Oladipo shined and then is fizzled. Ultimately, you cannot sort of count on him playing at a high level consistency. Kurt, did the Heat overstate what they expected from Victor Oladipo, or do you sort of take a flyer on players and hope for the best, understanding it could also be the worst?
I think with a player the way he played in the postseason, I think you take a flyer on Oladipo, don't you? Like, he's been there before. You have maybe one of the best training and recovery staffs in the league. And you take the bet. You take the bet that you can get. Look, you don't expect 82 out of him, right? Like, get him there for 65 and healthy in the playoffs, and he's worth every penny.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Greater Good chimes in here, and he says he thinks with recovery that Victor Oladipo can get back to where he was. But, Kurt, isn't there a point with an injury where maybe if the goal was to get back to 100% of your greatness, you have to be honest, one, with yourself, and then the team has to be honest with itself as far as how much farther back or how much back to 100% the player actually can get? Especially with something like tendinopathy that it can linger, right? And just kind of hampers you and slows you. This isn't a broken bone that heals or you put in a pin and you're back to being who you were before. This is a more chronic thing that just kind of slows you. So, yeah, I don't know. Look, I just don't think he's ever going to be all-star Oladipo anymore, but that's not what he's also – that $9 million a year salary is not a guy getting paid to be an all-star, right? If he comes off the bench and is a quality rotation guy who gives them secondary playmaking, that's all you're asking for. And maybe secondary defense also, because that I think was his best in last season's playoffs. So again, maybe he's a sort of, keep on the bubble wrap and break open when absolutely needed. We talked in our first segment. You can catch that on the Big O Show podcast about Kendrick Nunn. Kevin G says he thinks Kendrick Nunn can have a big impact for LA. Kurt, I guess the way I would cloak that is any reserve who contributes will have a big impact for the Lakers this season, correct? Absolutely. I mean, you saw that bench last night. Austin Reeves got big minutes last year. Now, credit Austin Reeves for
being that guy, but like they were playing Matt Ryan out there, who walked on this team, was not drafted last year. They didn't even give him an Exhibit 10. Like they had to keep him because Matt Ryan can shoot. And if you can shoot, like the Lakers are desperate for you. So like, yes, Kendrick Nunn can have a real impact on this team and is going to be important to the Lakers only because they don't have better options.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, they got to go with that. Carlos and a bunch of our doctors on here, I don't know if they're doctors or they stated Holiday Inn Expresses, but they were all saying that they see this being a long-term and ongoing thing with Victor Oladipo. Curt, I want to turn it a little different direction. The Miami Heat are $200,000 shy of the luxury tax. Any player they add puts them into the luxury tax. Is there anyone out there? In other words, Isaiah Thomas is out there, for example, and there's some other guards who went unsigned in free agency. Do you see the need for the Heat possibly to have to go into the luxury tax? Or do you say to yourself, you know what? You have Gabe Vincent. You have Jamal Cain, who had a nice offseason. Yes. You have enough young players you can get by. You have Drew Smith on a two-way. Or do you just let this play out organically and push come to shove, you worry about it a little more, sort of push the rock down the road a little bit?
I think you can push again, because they're the Heat, because Gabe Vincent and all these, Duncan Robinson and everybody off the bench, that they're just going to get solid minutes out of them. You can wait. You can save this move. If you're going to go into the tax, it's got to be for a good reason, right? That's that payout, if you're not in the tax this year, is estimated to be, Ira, and I think you know this, about $16.5 million.
Well, they're saying 16.5, but what they're saying is there's enough teams that can also get under that it might come down to about 10. For people who don't know, the luxury tax is computed at season's end. So teams that are $1 million over, something like that, basically they could sell off their player and a pick to a team that has the space under the tax in order for them to get the overage. So I'm told it's about $10 million, which certainly is a nice chunk of change that you don't want to leave on the table. Yeah. Again, the thing is, teams have basketball people and business people. Basketball people will always buy another player and take another player.
Yes.
But the business people are saying, $10 million is $10 million. So you sort of have Nick Arison there on the business side saying, hey, let's do the math on this also. We're not the biggest market team. We don't have the largest local television deal. We don't have the largest arena. We have to consider that also. So, yeah, I think they do weigh the luxury tax there. I think he'd go into the tax for the right player, which is probably a trade player. Matter of fact, one thing about the Lakers and sort of going into the tax and talking about all of this is, Curt, I was watching the Lakers game last night thinking of one name in particular on the Heat. And I'll throw it out to you there because the people, if you don't know, Curt is based out in the LA area, gets over to Crypto.com Arena, Staples Center.
I'll be there Thursday night. Yeah, for Lakers. I'll be there Thursday night when the Lakers get fed to the Clippers.
Exactly. So you'll see both LA teams there when the Lakers don't get championship rings anymore. But there's one name I was thinking of when I was watching that Lakers game last night who I think could really, really, really help them. Curt, put Duncan Robinson on the Lakers roster. How much would that upgrade the Lakers and what they're trying to do?
He has the potential to be what he was kind of his breakout year with the Heat, right? Like they're so desperate for shooting and guys who can move off the ball and get to the open spaces, because LeBron James, as we all know, is still as gifted a passer as this league has seen.
Correct.
Anthony Davis is a really nice passer. And some of the other shot creators, we were talking about Kendrick Nunn. Kendrick Nunn can find guys. Like they can move. Even Russell Westbrook will find guys. If somebody's just moving to open spaces and knocking down shots, it would be huge for them. If you want to put together that trade, you go ahead. Because the Lakers, the problem is they have the handful of super big salaries and they don't have anything. Then it's way down to like minimums. They just don't have those tradable $16 million contracts. Rob Pelinka has.
They don't have anyone you would want.
Interestingly,
they don't have anyone you would want except for their draft choices. The Heat are not a collect draft choices team, so that would almost have to be a three-way trade. But the same thing even with the Lakers and a Buddy Hield, you could just see why they were looking at players like that. So I can understand that. Getting back to our Victor Oladipo conversation, Two Extreme chimes in here in our YouTube chat board that even without Victor Oladipo, if Kyle Lowry gets back to being Kyle Lowry, that alone could be a jump that compensates. Curt, and matter of fact, it's interesting because you talked about right now, we were talking about LeBron James at his age. Is there a certain point where you just say to me, Ira, Kyle Lowry's old. He's 36. You can't expect the same player. Or because you get to watch LeBron on a nightly basis, do you say there are some players who have always played somewhat of an old man's game anyway, who can make it work at an older age? Do you still think Kyle Lowry can be a needle mover and can somewhat compensate if the Heat have to go extended periods without Victor Oladipo?
First off, I think you, I, and everybody need to stop using LeBron as a comp because he's a freak of nature. Like he's not built like other human beings. But I think Chris Paul is another example of a guy, though, with kind of an old man game, with an intellectual game, who had some down years, changed his diet, changed his workout routine, got in the shape he needed to be in, and came back and played at a high level. And I think, look, I don't know that Lowry's not Chris Paul. He's never going to be Chris Paul.
Right.
But he can be closer to that guy. He can be closer to the guy who bounces back. Look, he wasn't in shape, and he had a lot of personal stuff going on last year. I think you're going to see a better version of him. Is he back to being peak Toronto Kyle Lowry? I don't know that guy's ever coming back, but a guy who can really contribute for the Heat on both ends. Yeah, I think I agree. I think he can fill in some of that space just because he's going to be better.
Well, Kevin G chimes in here on the chat board. Who would you rather have right now? I think it's a simple question, but maybe it's more complex because of the beautiful mind of Kurt Helin. Who would you rather have right now, Kyle Lowry or Russell Westbrook?
Oh, Lowry. Lowry's a better teammate. Lowry will put in the work. I don't know how many people have seen this yet. Russell Westbrook's comment, he missed part of he only played 5 minutes in the one game he came off the bench, and he said he tweaked his hamstring because he came off the bench.
Yeah,
it's already starting there, man.
Everyone, I'm sure you can be doing something at NBCSports.com about that, and everyone was talking about that comment last night. The only sort of interesting thing coming out of the Lakers was Russell Westbrook saying, well, when you play me as a reserve, my body's not ready. That really bodes well for any team who might think, look, I'm sure there were a bunch of teams out there thinking, matter of fact, I'll put this to you, Kurt. If Russell Westbrook, and I don't think this is happening, and certainly not yet, if Russell Westbrook gets a buyout because he becomes untenable and he becomes untradeable, do you think there are NBA teams at the minimum or a minimal deal? Do you think NBA teams still believe they can salvage Russell Westbrook?
Salvage is the wrong word. I think that you know what he becomes? He comes the Colin Sexton for another team, right? Hey, here's a guy we can put out there. We'll fill up the stat sheet, not win us games because we're tanking, but we'll look like we're trying. If he wants to start and have the ball in his hands, he's that guy now. If he's not willing to accept the role coming off the bench and fitting in, then he's a guy that can help you lose respectably.
Which I don't know if it's the goal for many teams. So I want to throw one other this way because I like getting around the NBA since we have Kurt here who offers a national perspective. Kurt, is John Wall going to be more than Russell Westbrook, or is he just Russell Westbrook 2.0, guys who were traded for each other, guys who sat on contracts who aren't the players they once were, guys who arrived to LA teams with the hope of resurrection? You look at the Clippers, pretty loaded roster. They don't have to have the best of John Wall. They announced they're not starting John Wall. I'm really curious about it to see if John Wall can do what Russell Westbrook couldn't do. What's the thought? What's your thoughts on John Wall now that the Clippers are about to open their season?
I think the big difference here is just what we were talking about, which is I think Russell's still a little more explosive as a player. He's always, look, John Wall was a great athlete, but Russell Westbrook was one of the top 10 athletes this game has ever seen. Like
triple-double machine, right? And defended and cared.
Yeah. What Wall has, though, is an acceptance of his role. Like they've signed him with the Clippers because, hey, you might be coming off the bench. You might start. You might come off the bench. You're going to get these minutes, but we need you to fill a role. You're not the star anymore. And he has not only accepted that, he said he's excited. He's excited not to be Batman every night. He wants to be Robin. That's the difference. Like he's bought into what the Clippers are selling in a way. I don't think Russ is, with all due respect to Darvin Ham. Russ has said all the right things, but actions.
No, and I agree with that. As a matter of fact, the reason I brought that up, and Heat fans, I'm trying to stay in the Heat theme, is this reason. When I look at players like Westbrook, and I look at players like Wall, and I look at players like Oladipo, I think there's a certain point when you have to accept they're not who they were, and a certain point when they have to accept they're not
Yes.
who they were. And can they morph into it? And I think for players who used to be explosive guards, it's hard. And the cross there I would make is someone like a Kevin Love, who came around to embrace his sixth man role as an inside player, does not have to be explosive, never was overly athletic, always rebounded with savvy. But I think it's easier for a big man to sort of morph into that second stage of his career than someone who used to be explosive. I mean, we're seeing it now. Russell Westbrook doesn't get guys on his hip. I'm curious if John Wall, who's the ultimate speedster, could. Victor Oladipo never did that on his 4 of 18 shooting preseason and had to take a different shot menu because of that. So that's why I think it's interesting. Older guards don't age well. They age like Kurt and I do, which is why we're sitting here looking like this instead of looking like those young whippersnapper NBA writers out there now. So I think that's an interesting sort of part of it. And I want to segue, and I know we're up against a break, and we will preview the Heat and look through the roster. And in our final segment today on Inside the Paint, RedRecover.com show, we will do our weekly look ahead at the Heat schedule to prepare you for the week ahead. So the one Heat player I want to look at now before our break, again, an older player, 33 years old, and where does he stand? Kurt Helin, because we did this in our first segment, we talked about Zach LaVine, who will play the Heat tonight at FTX Arena. Kurt, if Jimmy Butler is the best player on your team, how far can you go in today's NBA? Not a puncher's chance, not a luck out, maybe someone will say in the bubble, not finding an East that teams have missteps along the way, players are injured like Joel Embiid last season, but starting fresh this year. Jimmy Butler is my team's best player. Therefore, my team can go how far?
Championship finals, because Jimmy's capable of raising his game in the postseason. You might have to do some load management, right? Like you've got to get him to the playoffs healthy. But I think we even saw last year, and frankly, the last couple of years, a healthy Jimmy can carry this team a long way. And you've got to put. Nobody's winning. Look, LeBron can only carry a team. Peak LeBron could only carry a team so far. You're going to have to get more out of Bam and Lowry and on down the line, like we've talked about. But he is a guy who can create, and not only create. You've got to hit tough shots in the playoffs, right? You've got to be able to hit the tough shot with the guy in your face, and that's thing Jimmy Butler can do at an elite level.
And I agree. Actually, there's one thing I want to throw to you right before the break and sort of put you on the spot, because that's what I'm here to do every Wednesday on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. I'm looking at the Chicago Bulls tonight, and I'm seeing that they're starting Patrick Williams at power forward. They were thinking about Javonte Green. They don't have a lot of really good options there at the moment. In my view, the Heat's best starting lineup for tonight would be Jimmy Butler at the 4, Bam Adebayo at the 5, Butler at the 4, Max Strus at the 3, Tyler Hero and Kyle Lowry. You get your most talent out there at the start. You get your best players out there. So I'm subbing in Jimmy Butler for Caleb Martin, but Kurt Helin. And you know this because you deal with a lot of NBA players and their egos. Jimmy Butler does not want to start at power forward. Most coaches do not want to match up. They want to have their lineup and develop their lineup. Do you think there's any way that Eric Spoelstra tonight can shock us and start Jimmy Butler at the 4, or does he know you don't mess with what Jimmy Butler don't want?
Yeah, I kind of think you can play key minutes with Jimmy Butler at the 4, and I think you would know better than I, Ira, but I think he's good with playing. Is this Anthony Davis at the 5, which they did start him that way last night? But is it one of those guys where, hey, you're not gonna be there, but you're gonna finish there. You're gonna play 15 minutes a game at that spot when we really need you. You're Draymond at the 5, right? You're not starting there, but crunch minutes, we're going to go to that. I think that's where you are with that lineup. I think you've got to start. You've got to keep Jimmy happy. You're going to have to start him at the 3 to start the season. I don't think. I think Spo knows what he's got to do.
Oh, and I agree. I'm afraid of Jimmy Butler. I don't know if Spo's afraid of Jimmy Butler, but I think you try to keep the group happy. So I agree with that. Yeah. When we come up in our final segment on Inside the Paint, brought to you by RedRecover.com, we'll do what we do every week on Wednesdays. We'll look ahead to the Heat's upcoming schedule, tonight against the Bulls, Friday against the Celtics, and then a Saturday-Monday baseball-type series, the only visit of the season by the Toronto Raptors. So it will be Precious Achiuwa reunion night. So we'll get some of that also after Goran Dragic reunion night tonight. So Kurt and I will break down the future of the Heat schedule over the next week. Kurt will give you all kinds of betting tips. Now I'll put him on the spot during the break.
Oh, great. Thank you.
And we will be back on redrecover.com Inside the Paint after this brief commercial messages. And we're back on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. He's Kurt Helin from NBCSports.com, Pro Basketball Talk. And we're back with our final segment. Big O will be back at the top of the hour to talk Tua. But that's at the top of the hour. For now, we'll finish up on hoops. I'm trying to get to the chat board. We got a lot to get here also, so I'm going to try to get through as much as I can here in the final segment. If you missed either of our first two segments, go to wherever you get your podcasts, or else just call Big O and he'll personally deliver it to your computer. Kurt, the Heat have 3 games coming up between now and when I talk to you next week when I'll be in Portland. A little bit later show next week because of the time difference for me. We don't care about you when you're stuck out there in LA. But when I'm going to Portland, we're going to start a little later. I think 5 o'clock next Wednesday. The Heat tonight, Chicago Bulls. We spoke about this a little bit in our first segment. Is there a particular matchup when you look at the Chicago Bulls? You have Vucevic at center. You have obviously the 2 good perimeter players in DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. You don't have right now Lonzo Ball. They're a little shorthanded, not a great bench. If you're playing the Chicago Bulls and you're Eric Spoelstra, you've had, I guess you can make an argument, you've had 4 months to prepare for this game.
Yeah.
What are you targeting? Where's your point of concern when you play the Chicago Bulls?
As much as Zach LaVine racks up points, I still think it's DeMar DeRozan who is their clutch player, who gets other guys involved and draws the defense. And he's the guy you're going to have to stop at the point of attack, whether that's with Jimmy Butler or combinations or however you're going to handle it. To me, that's the guy at the top of the board who you can't let. If he gets going, everything opens up for them. And look, they've got scores. Vucevic, their offense is pretty good. Vucevic can score, on and on down the line with them. So they're going to get their points, but I think you have to slow DeRozan and then really take advantage on offense because I don't think their defense is going to be good at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Heat do have the wherewithal. If they start the starting lineup we talked about in our last segment with Caleb Martin staying in there, you have Caleb Martin as a defender, you have Jimmy Butler as a defender. So you can, if you want, match up on Zach LaVine and match up on DeRozan and telling anyone else, hey, anyone else on the wing, go with Tyler Hero. We'll live with those results. Patrick Williams, your backup point guard, we can deal with that. So it will be interesting to see how the Heat handle the matchups because I think part of the Heat starting lineup now, and we're projecting. It's like I sound like almost like Steve Kornicki here at the NBC board over there. We are projecting right now the Heat starting lineup to be Bam Adebayo, Caleb Martin, Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, and Kyle Lowry. How often do you think the Heat will try to hide Tyler Hero at the start of games and matchups? Or how often do you think the Heat are resigned to other teams will hunt the matchup anyway? We're going to have to live with Tyler Hero's defense against starting level talent really for the first time.
I think that you're going to have to live with it a little bit, but there's only certain teams I think can really exploit it. Like you said, the Bulls tonight, you can put him on Patrick Williams, who's not he's just raw. It's just, I want him to be better than he is, right? Or you can put him on the point guard and you'll be fine. The second game, when you play the Celtics, that's a lot harder. There's not places to hide against Boston, and they are better about hunting matchups and they play at a higher level. And then I'm higher on Toronto than you are, but that's a tough team to play against because Fred VanVleet, and then everything's switchable. Everybody can score. Yes. Barnes and Siakam, and Precious Achiuwa, by the way, is a beautiful fit with that, isn't he? Like, hey, I'm 6'9", I can switch everything. I'm athletic. Right. They're just loaded with those guys, which is going to make it a little harder to hide. If you're trying to find a soft spot to land Tyler Hero, it's just harder against those teams.
Yeah, and I will be curious early in the year how the Heat handle it. We know they like to switch everything. We know they don't really go zone with that first unit. Right. I think as you bring the Duncan Robinsons and Max Struses in, you might try to hide players, especially if you play a Jovic with the second unit. But again, Eric Spoelstra will never allow zone to be their base defense because then they lose their identity and you lose the entire value of having a switch everything Bam Adebayo out there at center. So I will be curious, although and I know you don't get to see it as much as I do, Kurt, but I can't stand how the Heat almost capitulate on the pick and roll, and they switch off, so Bam does go on the perimeter, because Vucevic is very crafty. And if Vucevic gets a smaller body, even a Caleb Martin on him, he has plenty of dipsy doodle there in the paint that he can punish you. So I do wonder if there will be as much Bam switchability this season or not, based on how the other matchups go, because you're not playing big at the 4, because you are going smaller. Let's face it, even though he's 6'5", I felt comfortable if PJ Tucker switched onto a Vucevic. He would use his base. He would use his man strength to keep him out of the paint. It'll be a little more interesting with Caleb Martin there this season. So we have the Chicago Bulls season opener, FTX Arena tonight, 7:30 p.m. Then Friday, the Heat get on national television against the Boston Celtics, who looked very, very, very good last night, and that's without Robert Williams. We talked about this last week. I don't want to get into a league preview. We sort of did that a bit last week. Your favorite in the East, Boston or Milwaukee?
I've still picked Milwaukee just because they've got less questions. I trust them more. We'll see what happens with the coaching. We'll see what happens with Robert Williams coming back. The Bucks, I mean, just know who they are. But hey, by the way, Giannis Antetokounmpo is pretty good.
Yes,
but mostly they're not searching for their identity. Whatever you think of Budenholzer's coaching and everything else, like they just know who they are and what they want to do.
Yeah, to me, it's interesting at the top of the East for this reason. If you were to go to me, Kurt, Ira, who's the best big 2 in the East? I'd probably say Tatum and Brown right now. But if you were to ask me who's the best big 3 in the East, then I'd probably turn the other way and go Giannis, Holiday, and Middleton. Because I for all due respect to Marcus Smart and what he is, I don't know if he's a complete two-way player, even to the degree of a Drew Holiday. So it's sort of interesting. The best 1-2 punch I see Boston. The best 1-2-3 punch I see in Milwaukee, and you can even say maybe the best starting lineup. You go a little further and maybe look to Philadelphia. So it's a matter of how much you're going to push your stars early, how much aren't you? So the Heat do get a break to a degree. Robert Williams out. As a matter of fact, I'm sure you've touched on this several times. Well, I know you have it. Pro Basketball Talk. What's your thought on how long are the Celtics going to be without Robert Williams with that ongoing injury from last season?
And if you saw the news yesterday, he got the PPP injection in his knee, and they're now saying he'll be back second half of the season. So Christmas or after? Yeah, second half. That's a long time to go without the guy who really had their defense going. It looked good last night, but that's a long time to be without him, because they got rid of Daniel Tice. They don't really have a true Horford's kind of their 5 now. We'll see what happens. If they bring in Dwight Howard-like body, but look, they'll still win a lot of games. They'll be fine, but they're not going to be the Celtics till they get Robert Williams back.
And for those who don't know the Heat schedule, the Heat open against the Heat play Boston on Friday, and then the week after Thanksgiving, they have a road trip where they go to Atlanta the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend. And then that week on Wednesday, Friday, they play at Boston. So with the Robert Williams timetable, is like Kurt said, the Heat will miss Robert Williams in 3 of their 4 games against the Celtics this season, which could be meaningful in head-to-head, because last year, again, the Miami Heat finished 2 games free and clear top of the East. Boston, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia all finished tied. Tiebreakers should matter again this season, so you want to get those games. And that's why when people talk about maybe Eric Spoelstra experiments a little, we see some Jovic early in the season. He goes in different directions. My thought is you are playing 4 Eastern Conference teams at home to start your schedule. I don't want to say the Heat have to go 4-0. The sky won't be falling if they won't. But these are important games even for early in the season. Yeah. So you have Chicago tonight. You have Boston we're talking about right now on Friday. The whole chip on the shoulder thing, and you know this because you live this out there, especially with LeBron, how when anyone else was named MVP over his career, LeBron would subtly but always point it out to us, that it was someone else that wasn't him and how it wasn't right. So last year, I'm not sure any player campaigned more for an award than Bam Adebayo did for Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, he literally could have put in the back of his jersey DPOY. He wanted it so much. He went to Marcus Smart instead. Do you think in a matchup, even though they don't go head-to-head, and even though they met in the playoffs last season, that still carries some weight for a Bam Adebayo in Game 2 of an NBA season?
Oh, I think so. I think, look, the best players always are looking for motivation for, especially in the grind of the regular season, right? They're looking for something to get them fired up for a game and I think this is it. But this is a chance to show on a national stage, hey, I'm your defensive player of the year. I should be on this list. And by the way, he's my pick. I picked him to win it this year. But this is the kind of, it's too early to make a true statement game, I guess, but you can certainly put yourself on the radar with a big game. And no, Robert Williams not being there helps, right? Like that's a great matchup for him. Makes it a much better matchup.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, not having Robert Williams there makes this a better matchup for him, because that would have been one of the headlines of that game is, ooh, Robert Williams versus Bam Adebayo, and two of the front runners for Defensive Player of the Year. And now Bam gets the stage, man, and this is a chance for him to show off why he belongs there.
And that big matchup, if you had Horford and Robert Williams, then all of a sudden it becomes a test of do you really want to start Caleb Martin or do you want to go bigger? So you do have to wait on that. And that's why an NBA season evolves. What you see in the first week is not what you're going to see in midseason, is not what you're going to see in the playoffs. So you take the matchups as you can. I think these are meaningful regular season games because of that. The other thing I wanted to get to with Boston is we all know the Heat didn't make a major move in the offseason. We all know that the Heat lost PJ Tucker, so they were maybe a net negative in the offseason. I got to say last night, Kurt, watching the Celtics, Malcolm Brogdon fits. That was a heck of a pickup for them, wasn't it?
Yeah, he's the kind of, I mean, when they got deep into the playoffs last year and deep into their second, we get into the conference finals and finals, you've got to have the defenses get better, right? Like I can make life difficult enough for Tatum's going to get his, but you can make life hard for him and you can make it a little difficult for Brown. Where's my extra shot creation? Who's going to do it? Marcus Smart's not. I love Marcus Smart, but he's not that guy.
Right.
Like he's not shot creation guy. The Heat need Kyle Lowry to do some of that stuff. In big moments. Brogdon can do that, right? Brogdon was just a great fit. 15 points, got some assists, fit solidly, just make smart plays. He's going to have a big role for them. And by the way, talk about a guy who could be in your 6th man of the year running. I mean, or running up to Jordan Poole, who I assume is just going to run away with this thing. So.
If Tyler stays in the starting lineup, that reduces
That's true.
Last year's
That's true.
And I think that'll be the case also. To me, Malcolm Brogdon is the classic case of a good player needs to be on a good team to maximize what he does well. When he was with Milwaukee, it was the right fit for the right player. When he was with Indiana, it was a team going nowhere. He couldn't maximize his subtle greatness toward winning, and I think you're going to see this again in the Celtics right now. Then the Heat on Saturday night, it'll be the second night of a back-to-back, play the Toronto Raptors. They also host them on Monday at FTX Arena. This is an interesting team because you and I, Kurt Helin, have spoken about the top 4 or 5 in the East, and we mentioned Milwaukee, we mentioned Boston, we mentioned Philadelphia, we mentioned Miami, and we always want to put Brooklyn in there because they have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. But some people look at Toronto and say, okay, but besides Durant and Irving, you have the question mark of Ben Simmons. You have the limitations of Nick Claxton. You have maybe the niceness of a Royce O'Neal, but not an overwhelming player in your lineup, should they go in that direction. Toronto has a bunch of nice players, and they only play 7 players because Nick Nurse don't want to hear about your load management or your time off or anything. The Toronto Raptors, first, give me your holistic thoughts of the Raptors before we get into the Raptors-Heat matchup. What do you see from and the possibilities of the Toronto Raptors?
I mean, you and I talked about this last week. Like, if we gave the Nets the 5th spot in the East with the Big Four, who was that 6th team that avoided the play-in? And I went with Toronto just because I think their depth, but also just their versatility. They're just hard to play against because they don't play like anybody else, right? Like it's because they're long and switchable and don't necessarily play traditional position. They're the most positionless team in the NBA. I think in the regular season, that's hard to match up with. I think you can get them in the playoffs. I'm not sold on them as a contender, but in the regular season where you're trying to be you, here comes this very different animal with just a lot of long athletic players that defend well and cause problems. So they're just kind of a tough matchup. I think in some ways seeing them back-to-back 2 nights makes it a little easier. You get more, you've seen the picture, right?
1,000%. And I was going to chime in and interrupt you there like I always do. And I was going to say, during the regular season, you rarely fully game plan for a team because you're on to the next one. And yes, the first Toronto game is a back-to-back after Boston. There'll be no shoot-around on Saturday for extra preparation. But then you have a full day to go to school on what went wrong in one game and translates to what happened in the next game. And I think Toronto's a really good team because of their uniqueness to have that type of scheduling. You have a day off before them, and you have a day off after them. So you can go to school on Monday. It almost seems like, even though they're home games, you want to get a split in one of those baseball-type series and just move on, and that's sort of accepted. Do you think, because it's interesting, even early in the season, I was wondering if Eric Spoelstra might sit players on back-to-backs because they're an older team. Kurt, do you think it's safe to say there is no chance in hell that Kyle Lowry at 36 is going to miss a game against the Toronto Raptors?
That's actually a really good point. I was like, I think he would rest people, but I hadn't really thought about the emotional component. You might try to limit some minutes there on the second night of a back-to-back, or depending on how things are going in the first night. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think against Lowry isn't going to want to sit out that game. Maybe they'll do it anyway because
you got to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
But I don't think he'll be happy about that. That's a really good point. I had not thought of that.
Yeah, so I think the Toronto's interesting because obviously the trade, getting Kyle Lowry from them, Precious Achiuwa coming back in. The Raptors have turned him into the three-point shooter that the Heat couldn't, so you'll see a different-looking player. And yet, Kurt, I think the Heat, if they had to do it again, would make the Dragic and Achiuwa trade for Kyle Lowry because they are a win-in-the-moment team. Do you see in any way that trade coming back to bite the Miami Heat?
Not really. I think you're right. I think they'd make that trade again. Dragic is kind of past his prime. Achiuwa's a good rotation player who I said earlier. I just think he fits better in Toronto than he's going to fit most places because he's not a traditional five. He can play some four, but I think in that more positionless life they live in Toronto, I don't think he played really well at the end of last season, and I don't think that's a fluke. I think this is so much for the NBA role players. This is true of everybody. So much about fit. If you're Jimmy Butler, you're good everywhere. If you're Bam Adebayo, you're good everywhere. But if you're Tyler Hero or Duncan Robinson or Gabe Vincent or Caleb Martin, it matters. Fit matters so much, and it matters to Precious. I agree. I think this is a good spot.
Lightning round right here on the last minute going out the door. The game everyone hates to play. We're going to go real quick. Miami Heat, Chicago Bulls tonight, FTX Arena. Who wins, Kurt Helin?
Heat.
I agree. I think the Bulls are meh. Miami Heat, Boston Celtics, national television, Friday night, FTX Arena. Who wins, Kurt Helin?
Celtics. They looked really good.
Celtics will have 2 days off before they play that game. They don't play since last night's game to FTX Arena. I think the Heat have a chip on their shoulder. I think Jimmy Butler comes down and drains a three late in the game as the difference in that Eastern Conference Finals Game 7. Saturday night, FTX Arena, Miami Heat, Toronto Raptors. Kurt Helin, who wins?
That's the back-to-back, right? So
yes.
I'm still going to go Heat. I still think they're a better
I think back-to-back older Heat team, younger Raptors legs, even though Fred VanVleet's not so young. I go Raptors Monday night, Miami Heat rematch Toronto Raptors, FTX Arena, 7:30 p.m. Who do you have, Kurt Helin?
Even if they lose the first one, they get this one because this is a tough team to play against. But like I said, if you've seen them twice, the mystery goes away. It's the third time through the lineup you've seen the pitcher.
I think the Miami Heat celebrate Tua's comeback on Sunday night against the Steelers. They're in a good mood. They beat the Raptors. They head out west, and that's where I'll be talking to Kurt Helin next week. We're going to start at 5 p.m. because we're on the West Coast. I'll be in Portland to preview that 3-game West Coast trip. Trailblazers, Warriors, and then the Sacramento Kings. We'll be back next week on Wednesday on the RedRecover.com Inside the Paint Show.
You're listening to the RedRecover.com Inside the Paint Show with Ira.